This year is the second year in a row that my husband and I have had a little garden. It's not very big, but it suits us very nicely. Now, with it being the second year of our garden, we've learned a few things along the way. First, for our second year, we planted far less plants. We wasted so many vegetables last year because we just produced too much and couldn't keep up. And we definitely had an issue with overcrowding on the plants. Second, we prayed to the plant gods this year, asking them to make sure that the rabbits stay away from the garden. You all know what I'm talking about. And so far, so good, because no rabbits, but there's still plenty of time for the rabbits to wreak havoc in our garden. Plus, this year it's not nearly as hot as last year, and I'm not pregnant, so I'm able to help out in the garden a little more. But my blue does most of it. So far, everything's going pretty well in our garden, and I have a feeling that our garden is going to be better this year than it was last year. Our last hymn in our hymn series is In the Garden. And I have to say that I really haven't found a lot of information about the history and particularities of this hymn in my research. There's just far less information about In the Garden compared to the other hymns we've highlighted in the past weeks. But this is what I do know about this hymn. In the Garden was written in 1912 by C. Austin Miles, who was a pharmacist turned publisher. Slate of this hymn was composed in a cold and dreary basement in New Jersey, where there were neither windows nor a view of the garden. This hymn became popular due to it being played numerous times during the evangelist Billy Sunday's campaigns in the 1900s. Like most of our other hymns, In the Garden has been reworked by numerous musicians over the years, including Perry Como and also Elvis Presley. While our first hymn in this series was On Angel's Wings, which was the unofficial funeral song for Catholics, it seems that In the Garden is the unofficial funeral song for Protestants. We probably all heard it played at a funeral we have attended. I think the reason it's become so popular at funerals is because it talks about a certain closeness that one has with God. And a person can find comfort in knowing that their loved one is in the presence of God. And early on in the grieving process, this kind of reassurance is very much welcomed and desired. When I looked In the Garden up in our hymnal, the scriptural reference that coincides with the hymn is John 20:11-17. Now, from what I researched, I'm not sure if the scripture was a reference point for this hymn verse, but I think it was. But like I said, there just really wasn't that much information about In the Garden out there. Regardless of whether it was an inspiration or not, John 20:11-17 and the words of In the Garden kind of complement each other really nicely. What we have in our scripture that Bob read earlier today is a selection from the traditional resurrection story. Prior to our scripture, we find out that Mary Magdalene is first discovered that Jesus' body is no longer in the tomb. So she goes to Peter and the beloved yet unnamed disciple to tell them where she is found, and they go into the tomb, and they do find it empty, just as Mary told them they would. Afterwards, they leave the tomb to go to their homes, and they are perplexed. At the beginning of our scripture, we find out that Mary has stayed behind and is still at the tomb. Instead of being perplexed, she is just quite sad. Sad that Jesus' body is gone. She worked so much courage to go to Jesus' tomb in the first place. And now another terrible thing has happened. First, she had to grieve the loss of Jesus and his death. And now she grieves the loss of his life. Now, amidst the tears, Mary enters into Jesus' tomb this time. But this time, the tomb is not empty. because there are two angels, and the one's both full and empty tomb. And in a way that only angels can, they speak to Mary and ask her, "Why are you weeping?" And Mary tells the angel that she's so incredibly sad, because Jesus is nowhere to be found, because someone has taken his body. So she exits the tomb, and her eyes meet a man who she assumes is a gardener. But in actuality, this man is Jesus. But she doesn't recognize him at first. Jesus, like the angels, asks Mary, "Why are you weeping?" And he adds, "Whom are you looking for?" However, Mary really didn't answer the questions that the gardener proposes. And I imagine it's because she's more than a bit frustrated and panicked at that point. Because she's been asked the same two questions, the same question twice in the course of just a few minutes. And on top of this, her entire world has been turned upside down again by the disappearance of Jesus' body. For Mary, it was just a lot to deal with in a very short period of time. By the answer that she does give the gardener, it seems that Mary is done with small talk, and she just desperately wants to see the body of Jesus and know where it is. She desperately wants to be reunited with Jesus, if not in his life, at least in his death. But then Jesus, who Mary still believes is a gardener, says a simple Mary. And it's in that moment Mary realizes who is in front of her, who asked her, "Who you are looking for is not the gardener, but instead he is her beloved Jesus, the one she had been looking for." And Mary greets her beloved Jesus with the Hebrew word for teacher, Rabboni. And I imagine that at the sight of this, at the awareness that Jesus is indeed right there in front of her, she throws herself at Jesus in a loving embrace. But Jesus tells her to not hold on to him, both literally and figuratively, because his work is not done on his own. Jesus redirects Mary by telling her to tell the disciples that he is going to ascend back to God. And after our scripture, there are numerous stories depicting Jesus appearing to the disciples and many others in a variety of ways. And indeed, when he is ready, and when the time is ready, he does return to God. Now, it's probably something that was brought to my attention before, but I forgot along the way that Jesus, too, was not in a cemetery like we have today. Back in Jesus' day, the place where you had to bury your loved one was a space filled with family trees that had a great amount of space in between. That was really reserved for the wealthiest of wealthy families. Now, instead of rows upon rows of graves, you had graves and tombs spread out from one another, with lush and beautiful greenery dispersed in between. And in order to keep up this gorgeous plant life, there needed to be someone in charge of this, and that person was a gardener. So it's not surprising that Mary thought that the person she was talking to was a gardener, because Jesus was dead. And dead people just don't come back to life, yet alone talk. They just don't. That defies the laws of logic and nature. What is dead remains dead. Now, I can't know for sure, but our friend seems to have received the inspiration for his title from that image of a gardener who was really Jesus during the resurrection scene. And that's a completely different focal point on this traditional Easter and resurrection story. Most of this time, the Easter story stops and ends at the tomb